This is session number 8 on chapter 10, entitled Disobsession Therapy. I don't know about you, but I am really curious as to what he's going to be discussing tonight. This sounds very interesting. So I don't want to take up too much time. So Leo, please.
Hello and good afternoon. Can you hear me well, Daniel? Good? Session 8, finally, right? And I say finally in a good way, not in a hurry or any other way that the finally may bring to our heart or anything. It's definitely a journey, learning and emphasizing certain areas of this idea of plenitude and learning about our suffering and what we go through because of our past, because of our mistakes, right? Because of the evolutionary path that we have chosen, sometimes not well attended, not well analyzed, and we make mistakes because we make abrupt decisions, not thinking, as Joanna DeAngeli herself said in the message that we opened tonight. So tonight we will have this amazing discussion about disobsession therapy, which is something that the Spirit Center provide, right? Which is something that we all know about it. We visit, we talk about it, we discuss it, we try to understand. So what we would like to do is, yes, continue to talk a little bit about what we already learned, what we already know. Many of us have benefited from the sessions, right? The disobsession sessions, in terms of the therapy that we provide, in terms of the passes, the water, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But what we'd like to do is for us to amplify our understanding of the causes, the reasons why, and the how, right? We get into such issue of our lives. And how we are still seeing as well obsession in the world, right? Again, we always like to remind everyone that before we get to plenitude, we have to understand the reasons why we're not plentiful yet. We are not happy yet. So this is what we have seen so far. Suffering, an analysis of suffering, the origins of suffering, the end of suffering, approaches to end suffering, altruism, causes of suffering, pathways to health, the process of self-healing, which I'm going to quiz you guys tonight to see if you remember what are the pathways, and then tonight, disobsession therapy. It's interesting that we have one more session that we'll talk about alternative therapies. And from this point on, let us think, what would be the alternative therapies that we will see hopefully next month? Suffering in the face of death, suffering in the afterlife, and release from suffering. So let us try to understand, let's take a step back. When we talk about a therapy, right, it implies what? That we're trying to get better from a problem. An existing problem. We can't just think, oh, we're taking a therapy, or we will receive help for something that we don't need. So if we're receiving help, that means we have a problem. Excuse me, one moment. Just in case we have an overflow. So we have an issue to take care of it. Now, sometimes that's hard because many of us, when we're going through troubles in our lives, whatever that may be, we don't like to accept that we have an issue. Sometimes talking to ourselves saying, I have this problem. I'll give you one and you guys will laugh. Waking up early and jumping out of bed. I have that problem. What do? You have to acknowledge first. Until you acknowledge that you're getting late to work, you're getting late to certain places in the morning, not that that was happening. I do have an issue, but I try not to be late at work in the morning. But you have to do what? You have to acknowledge. You have to really say, I have this issue. So what can I do? Number one, you're not going to change overnight. Number two, you have to really put the effort, and we have seen this here, but we have to acknowledge somehow. What is obsession? Because the idea is disobsession therapy, right? The idea is for us to treat obsession. What is obsession? So let's go over quickly. Daniel, am I using an A1 or A2 on this? So A2 would be the right one. Okay, I'll just put it aside. Sorry about that. John of the Angelus says the following: a moral blight of the spirit, obsession is much more widespread than one might imagine, periodically becoming a swiftly contagious virus by virtue of circumstances, which, as a consequence of the evolution of the individual in the planet, require the cleansing of a huge amount of bad debt, is still weighing on the social economy. We're not talking about the economy as far as money, it's social economy, everything. And it's interesting that I want to acknowledge this here too, that we have gotten thus far with problems as a natural consequence because we don't know any better. Now the problem is repeating, as we also we'll see tonight, and we also see through the different collections. John of the Angelus, André Luiz, he refers to several cases of individuals reincarnating as the one who is being the prosecutor or the victim, over and over and over and over. This is natural. We are evolving. We will make mistakes. Again, the problem is how we handle it. The problem is how much we hold and for how long we hold of the crimes that we have committed in the guilty feeling, as well as we prosecute others who have hurted us in the past because they don't know any better. In the medium's book, obsession is characterized as the domination that certain spirits may acquire over certain individuals. And we will be referring back to the medium's book. If you go to the medium's book and study this chapter, you will see that Kardec is really putting emphasis on the communications, right? On the medium, right? Who is receiving communication. But this is important, number one, for us to have a reference where we find information in terms of the types of obsession, not only obsession, but the types of obsession, as well as how do we treat it, okay? It's okay that some of the verbiage that we will be using, it will be, again, geared towards a medium, someone who's working or he's servicing their time within Spiritism, okay? But we have to understand we're all mediums, and we'll see this again here. So it's this domination that certain spirits may acquire over certain individuals. John of the Angelus is also, in this chapter, referring more to the influence that we have of discarnated spirits to incarnated ones. But she also mentions that it can happen between one of us, incarnated ones. Incarnated towards a discarnated one. We have to make sure that we analyze this and we bring this to the spectrum as well, because it's not just one or way or the other, right? And I forgot to say something that is really interesting. I would like to remind everyone and those on the web as well who will be watching this in the future to make sure that you watch the talk by Giulio Padovan, Spiritual Interactions, because it gives a lot of information. You can just go to our page and you can look for the talk. I actually, as you all mentioned, I ask permission to reference this talk because it gives a lot of information to a foundation for all of us to understand what this connection is, how it's established, the reasons why it's established as well, right? The handshake that he mentioned, the contract that we have with one another, because if I'm a victim today, it's not by chance, right? Somehow we connected in the past, and we'll see this over and over again. So the idea here is to remind ourselves that the connection happens any way or the other. incarnated towards incarnated, discarnated towards discarnated as well. Yeah, in the spiritual realm, it happens as well, or the other way around, right? Incarnated through discarnated, discarnated to incarnated. And it's always good to remind ourselves that their influence, the influence of the discarnated one upon us, is greater than we suppose. Because we may think, oh, does it really happen? Everything that I'm thinking or feeling is all mine, or do I suffer an influence, right? If anybody walks through this door right now, speaking loudly or yelling, or anybody here starts doing that, it's going to impact us, right? Obviously, our senses are picking up the information, and we're processing, and we'll try to find out what's going on. Or if I just walk out of here, I will impact somehow the environment. And it's the same thing from the other side to this side, right? So we have to make sure that we acknowledge this. And this is something that Spiritism brings to us very well, giving us the insight of that we're not alone. And that's for all of us, In Eastern antiquity, Joanna de Angelis we go back to Joanna de Angelis, and later during the Middle Ages, obsession took on epidemic proportions, sweeping nations, giving them a reprieve, and then returning unexpectedly. Obviously, this is kind of jumping ahead of us, which we'll talk a little bit more about it later on, in certain cases that we have seen here at the SSB, and we have heard as well from other Spiritist centers. Why does it happen? Why certain nations, certain groups of people, certain individuals that we may know, they get sick, and we know, based on our information that we have nowadays, that there's some kind of influence, right? Because we're all connected. And they get better, and then later on, they fall into the same issues. We don't have to answer, but think about it. Why does that happen? Why does it happen to us that sometimes we are not feeling well, and then we pray, we do what we're supposed to do, we watch and pray, and we change our habits, but later on, everything comes back? Or even worse, if we can say it that way. We'll talk more a little bit more later on. But that's something that we have to acknowledge, since Joanna de Angelis bringing it at the beginning of the chapter as well, and not only for one individual or group of people, but as we can see here, groups of people, right? Large groups of people. Confused with insanity, it is in its many forms. Obsession has challenged scholars of behavior, health, religion, and mental science. It is usually subtle, but at times it assumes unexpected proportions, leading those who fall into its grip to unfortunate extremes. Sometimes the way a doctor may examine the symptoms of an obsession may come, as we'll see with Joanna de Angelis, as other issues that we have, mental issues that we consider nowadays in society. And we don't know how to treat it. We don't know how to tackle, right? As well as something else that Joanna de Angelis mentions that it's important for us to acknowledge, because we're not doctors at the Spiritist Center. Since we're talking about a Spiritist therapy, we're not doctors. We don't have, even though many of us hold degrees in certain areas that would be able to help, we don't do that at the Spiritist Center. So Joanna de Angelis reminds us that, look, it's important to find and look the doctor's help. Go to the doctor, find out what you have. What you have here is something different. We'll see it later on. But it's important that we acknowledge that as well. If we know of any Spiritist center, any location that offers, that passes the treatment as we were talking here, and they say, oh, you don't have to go to the doctor, please don't go anymore, because that's not right. If God gives us the intelligence to develop and understand the physical body, we need to acknowledge as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. So it starts subtle, as she says. It's not something that we can perceive at times, or let's say at all times. When we talk about an obsession, to the degree that we no longer respond to our actions, it doesn't start overnight. So today I'm well, and then tomorrow something happened. I don't respond for myself anymore. Let's see what we can learn from the medium's book again. Simple obsession, the first one. Simple obsession occurs when malevolent spirits impose themselves upon mediums, interfere against their will in the communications they receive, impede them from communicating with other spirits, and substitute themselves for those who are evoked. Remember, I warned you guys, this is mainly talking about mediumship, mediums, right? But how do we translate this to our lives? We're all mediums. We all have some kind of connection, right? Simple obsession occurs when malevolent spirits impose themselves upon mediums. We know that if a spirit is imposing he or herself or itself over me, we know that's a malevolent spirit. Because if it was a well-guided spirit, that wouldn't happen. Interfering against, and I'll say my communication with others. The way I relate with one another. How does that happen? Somebody says, it's a beautiful day. Instead of acknowledge that it is a beautiful day, I may think that the person is trying to say something funny. It's a beautiful day for you, not for me. And sometimes we hear people, saying that, right? Oh, it's a beautiful day, really? I wish I had your life. Well, I was trying to say something nice, right? This is exactly what happens. And it's little by little. It's little by little. So the communication is established. And we see it completely different. Whatever it's said to us, it's perceived completely different. Impeding us from communicating with other spirits, substituting themselves for those who are evoked. Sometimes you go and talk to somebody, right? And they are already manipulating that other individual that we're trying to get something across, a message, and what happens? We get lost. And then we create more problems. That is the subtle, that we already can identify. We already feel it. Sometimes you don't have to say anything. Before the hello, that's it. It's done, right? And you see that there is a connection. The second one, it's a little bit worse. Fascination has much more serious consequences. It refers to a delusion created directly by a spirit in the thought of a medium, which in a certain manner paralyzes his or her capacity to judge the quality of the communications. Fascinated mediums do not believe themselves to be deceived. So now I'm to the point that, look, I can judge. What the influence is telling me, it's the connection that I have, is telling me to do or to act or to feel. And I really don't think that I'm being deceived. That's me. I have no open heart or mind whatsoever for what others will say to me or alert me in that manner. It gets worse. Subjugation is a constriction that causes its victims' will to become paralyzed, making them act in spite of themselves. In other words, they find themselves under true bondage. Subjugation can be either mental or physical. In the former, those who are subjugated are led to make frequently absurd and compromising decisions, which, under a kind of delusion, they regard as sane. It is a type of fascination. In the latter, the spirit acts upon the physical organs to produce involuntary movements. In writing mediums, it produces an incessant need to write even at inopportune times. I'm going to utilize a case that we know, you probably have heard Divaldo Franco mentioning, that there was a spirit for some time would come and would want to write in the middle of the night, in the middle of, wherever. And for some time, he would think, well, should I do this? Should I not do this? Right? Well, if it is a spirit that is well-guided again and wants to write something, it will respect the medium's time. It will respect a well-guided schedule to come and connect with the medium. And afterwards, after learning from the issues that he's going through, he said, nuh-uh, You don't control my body. You don't control what I do. There will be a specific time that you'll be able to write. We'll be able to connect and you can write what you would like to write. And I'm summarizing here somehow so we understand. Are we all mediums that sit down and write? And no, or psychophonic? No, we're not. So how does this translate to our lives? When we find ourselves doing things that is not the appropriate time or the appropriate place, right? Thinking, acting, saying things that is not appropriate, guess what? This may be it. And it starts somehow in our lives when we lost track of time. We didn't have a schedule for our lives. So the spirits then connect with us, saying, okay, Leo doesn't wake up early. He does whatever he wants. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. I'm going to connect with him when the mind is flying somewhere. It happens. I used to think that this idea of subjugation is when the person is completely paralyzed, and we have seen videos, cases as well, once more, through the different literatures that we have, that the person is completely paralyzed or doing crazy, insane things. It's not. It doesn't have to get to that point. And we see a lot of people walking on the streets, going to their jobs the same way. They're there, but it's really something else, to say the least. Sometimes when we feel lethargic, that we don't do and we can't move, we need to ask ourselves, are we getting to that point that we're getting paralyzed? Not putting aside, obviously, physical issues that we may have, a good night of sleep, you know? So we have to analyze this. And I'm really putting emphasis on this because it's important. It's really important. She says at the beginning of the chapter that she dedicates this chapter because it's something really important. Not because it's a therapy of the spiritist science. No, it's because this issue, the root cause of the problem is very severe. And she refers as a virus that we need to take care of it, right? So moving on, we know that we have these steps, right? She says the following. Humanity has suffered its effect periodically, considering it a divine punishment. The methods used to combat it have been no less cruel due to ignorance about its origin, making it impossible to confront and improve it using skillful, effective means. Spiritism comes, brings us the origin, and from when it started, right? What's the origin? There's a connection. If there is a connection already established, right, something that we feel towards another individual, or something that perhaps we analyze that at the beginning was really nice, right, and now it's not so well, well, perhaps we can say that it started now. However, sometimes when we feel an impulse, when we feel an adverse way about a situation or a person, there's got to be a reason behind this, number one, and it was not established now. But it's hard for us to see because of the physical body. Us reincarnating in this life, we're so attached, we're so ingrained in the physical body that it's hard for us to acknowledge what has happened before. And Spiritism again comes and say, look, if you can't find, and this is in the Gospel according to Spiritism, if you can find the reasons in this life, go back. You don't have to do any regression or anything. But look at the tendencies that you have with that towards that situation, perhaps the other individual as well. We will see that we have some established connection. This is insanity by reason of obsession. That is, by reason of the interference of the mental presence of a discarnate spirit in the life of an incarnate spirit. Obsession can also malevolently influence the physical organization, producing pathologies as complex as they are harmful. So, if we stop living our lives, taking care of ourselves, we don't have to go into details of what pathologies we can bring many examples, but we don't have to go into details. But what's going to happen to us? We'll stop taking care of ourselves. Something will deteriorate. Even if we're just by thinking that we're not going to take care of ourselves, let's say, taking a shower, brushing our teeth, taking care of ourselves, our appearance, something will deteriorate. Allan Kardec studied it proficiently and was the first investigator to penetrate its causes and dissect them, presenting compatible therapies capable of minimizing or eradicating it altogether. And we can see again in the different literatures of Spiritism, as well as we are kind of go briefly on it on the Medium's book. Before Kardec, Jesus repeatedly faced and assisted obsessors and obsessed with his ineffable love, freeing them from each other with his restorative power. I want to take a step here and analyze something really interesting that's going to help us. And we had the insight to study this area because it will help us later on when we study what we do or remind ourselves what we do in the Spiritist Center. We all know that there are many parts or references in the Bible, right, in the Gospel that shows us what? Jesus taking care of the evil spirits, taking care of the obsessors. How did it happen? Somebody would come, right, or would be brought to Jesus and say, this person has an issue. And what would Jesus do? He would say, get out of this body, leave this individual alone. You don't belong to this body. And we also want to take in consideration that most of these, let's say, therapies or sessions, right, with Jesus, the individual was already in a subjugation mode or condition that was already escalated, right? And Jesus took care of it just by saying something. Now, did Jesus help the obsessed and the obsessor? Did he? How? I want to just make us think here a little bit. And please don't think that I'm questioning what Jesus did or the way he did, because we went a lot to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and on the Sabbath he taught the people. They were amazed at his teaching because his words had authority. In the synagogue there was a man possessed by a demon, an impure spirit. He cried out at the top of his voice, "Go away! What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." Then the demon threw the man down before them all and came out without injuring him. All the people were amazed and said to each other, "What words these are! With authority and power he gives orders to impure spirits, and they come out." And the news about him spread throughout the surrounding area. Did Jesus treat the obsessed and the obsessors? Because as we read here, he only helped the obsessed, and he cast out the obsessors. Again, I'm not questioning. So, what do you guys think? What would be the approach that if we were to see someone who is obsessed, that we would utilize to help that individual? I know it's hard to where I'm trying to get to, but let's jump into it. Here's the thing. It seems like Jesus was just casting people out, the spirits out, right? We all know that we're what? Creatures of one God. We're all brothers and sisters, whether we're discarnated or incarnated, right? Does this seem kind of fair to the spirits who are also obsessing the obsessed? Why not? You can say yes. Why do you think it's not fair, or it's fair?
Well, it is, I think, the only way to do, because if the obsessor is taking the body that is not his or doing something wrong, that's the only way, is to say, go away, it's not your place.
Okay.
You know, so he has to understand, the obsessor, that there is an authority above him, above him obsessor over any person.
Gotcha.
So by Jesus having this authority, he understands he cannot do whatever he wants,
Okay.
obsessing anyone he wants or victimize somebody. So I think it's the only way. And once he understands that he cannot use that power over other in a bad way, then he may be rescued later with kindness if it's something,
Thank you. Thank you. And you touched in some of the points that I would like to bring.
I would say free will.
Free will.
Jesus respected free will of the obsessor.
Jesus respected the free will of obsessors.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Do you want to elaborate on it? Okay. All right. So one thing is undeniable, and we see here, right? The authority of Jesus. What kind of authority was that?
Pure spirit.
Huh?
He's a pure spirit.
He is a pure spirit, right?
He gave the example.
Through example. The authority is not power, money, moral authority. Thank you. Thank you. So it's not money, it's not power, it's moral authority. That he would be able to speak and say, that's it. Enough is enough. Now, one of the things that we also have to take into consideration, and we have to look, is sometimes we watch movies, right? That you have one situation, one isolated situation, and then the movie starts showing all the that this man who was suffering, right, created for himself, saying, I want to be free from. Never worked alone, even on earth. He actually chose some individuals to come and follow me. Those who he cured, wanted to follow him and say no. We see this idea of the ability or the wanting to rehabilitate, as we studied last session, when some of the individuals who came and asked for help and they were cured, Jesus said what? Some of these spirits, perhaps, they would come, be cast out, and they would be helped by other higher spirits that was also accompanying Jesus at the time, as it happens now. As it happens now. Where does those individuals, right? There's the group of people, and we'll get into the details of one, but there's a group of people working at the Spirit Center who also, along with the mentors of the house, that will also help these individuals. Because if we try to do by ourselves, or if it does give the sense that it's possible, right? Obsession didn't start in the year 2000. No, it's with us for many, many years. Spiritism did not bring this to us. This is something else that we can get from this. Another lesson that we can get from this passage. But this authority, it really changes someone's life. Because it doesn't have to be a subjugation, but when we speak with someone who comes and asks us for an advice, who is suffering, and you say something, and the person says, you know what, it makes sense. It's that grandfather, right, or that grandmother, when we go and we ask for something, they say it so wisely, in few words, that you're like, wow, I get it now. And you feel so ashamed of having asked it, right? And then you're like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have. Well, we really should, because that's, perhaps that individual is the medium of goodness that we also have to acknowledge. So it was cast out, but rest assured, with all his grandeur, with all his power, knowledge, moral involvement, that Jesus was able to help the one that was obsessed, as well as those who were obsessing as well. And there is time. I would like to acknowledge something else that Yasko said, that not every spirit that gets to be cast out or asked to let go of this individual, they are ready to evolve. So then you may ask, okay, if that spirit who was obsessing allows it to continue, and that's key for our understanding tonight. Joanna de Angelis continues, and this will illustrate a little bit of what we just said, if we'll continue or not, or if we'll get better temporarily, right, with the help that we receive, and we fall again in the future. Selfish and thoughtless, they did not measure the consequences of their venal acts and became bound to each other with shackles of hatred and revenge that made them increasingly miserable. Consequently, they plod along for centuries of excruciating suffering. I'll say this again. Consequently, they plod along for centuries of excruciating sufferings, switching back and forth from victim to tormentor, until love kindles the light of hope in their darkness, and forgiveness makes them true siblings on the evolutionary path. Sometimes it happens in not a so good way. We are forced into it, right? And then we come through the hurdles and the difficulties, but we get it. At one point, it's going to have to happen. We suffer so much that we say, we're tired, right? The problem is that when we don't take the opportunities to settle on these things, and it goes over and over and over for centuries. Love, therefore, is the first medication to be used in disobsession therapy. Love opens the doors to hope and reveals the sacred purposes of life, enabling forgiveness to soothe the pain caused by the ulcerations of hatred. As long as resentment, ill will, distrust, and spite persist, obsession is an acid burning the delicate mental components and producing tormenting mental problems. So when we talk about this love, it's not the love that and we have mentioned this here at the SSB and in many talks perhaps that you have watched. It's not the love that we understand as loving a person unconditionally. We will never get to that point. I shouldn't say. We will not get to that point overnight with somebody who we have an issue with. One day perhaps we will love that individual unconditionally. Some people may not agree with me, but one day we'll see. One day we'll see. But it's to truly say, enough is enough. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to be this individual who is living or reacting to something that may happen. Sometimes the obsessor is already away, but we still carry that wound inside of ourselves, and then we turn into the obsessor of somebody who just left. So it's important that we acknowledge that when we talk about love, it's the understanding. It's the change that we can bring to ourselves, right? And what we propose of the new, right? So that we don't get into this madness of dealing with others in a negative way. Mediumship, on the other hand, is the grand opportunity that identifies and cures obsession, because it is through its intricate mechanism that, I have to make that correction there, obsession manifests, and the parties can be addressed. Parties, not one individual, the obsessed, but all the ones involved. Obsessed, obsessors, family of the obsessed, family of the obsessors as well, those around it. Sometimes we think, why did this person knock at the spirit door? Our spirit is sent. When we say our, right, the house that we are, in this time, we are actually working and dedicating or helping one another. Why? Is it by chance? No. It could be, in a sense, that yes, it was guided by the higher minds to go to the Spirit Center. Is in Baltimore. You can go over there, you can find some help. But most likely we had a connection in the past. We have done something somewhere that we connected. So it's not by chance. And when we acknowledge this possibility, things becomes a little bit easier. As well as we establish a higher authority to come and say, Leo, try to do it a different way. Leo, don't say it this way, say it that way. And if I'm well, I will accept the idea. I will accept the proposal. And then we can live a better life. Still on the why, and this is important. The patient, the victim of obsession, is certainly endowed with mediumship, and he or she needs the proper education to apply it constructively. If we are being obsessed, if we have whatever level that may be, the simple, the fascination, subjugation, it's another confirmation that we're all mediums. If you find yourself under any influence whatsoever, We're all mediums. And if you want to tell somebody in a very eloquent way that we're mediums or not, just relate to this message right here. It's the best way that we can help someone understand that we in fact mediums. Very easy, very simple. Since we suffer this influence, we're all mediums. Some to a certain degree, some others, I don't feel anything. Well, but you think. We feel. We taste. We smell. All of these can be guided under an influence. Obsession is a severe disease even when it appears in the simple form of a depressive inspiration or a pathological state that compromises physical health. This is because it requires the patient's moral transformation and an emotional shift on the part of the obsessor who, conscious of it or not, has set it in motion. The transformation must be ours as the obsessed. Obviously, if we're the obsessor, that sometimes we can be, I like to put myself on that one too. I know some of us don't like the idea of, to be called an obsessor, right? I usually joke with Daniel because sometimes we have a soccer game, a really nice soccer game, and I'm studying, and he calls me, Leo, Flamengo will play. I'm like, okay, here comes the obsessor. Now I'll be thinking about the game. Sometimes I go and stop, I give away to the obsessor, but it's a good thing just to get our minds off the craziness of every day. And we forget that we could be these individuals. We could be this individual who is obsessing someone else or sending vibrations. We study thought in life, how we are well connected with one another or sometimes not well connected, right? Obsession exists only because the obsessed person owes a moral debt. Nobody will knock on your door to ask for something that you owe them if you don't owe them. If you don't pay your taxes, what happened? Somebody's going to knock on your door. If you don't owe, if you pay your taxes, that's it. I mean, you're settled, at least for that year, right? Depends on what you're going to make that in the next year. But if you do what you're supposed to do, right? Nobody's going to knock on your door. So if somebody knocks on your door, you owe something. What do we have to do? We stop and think. Where was the connection established? How was it established? What do I owe this individual? Or what do I owe as well to the universe? Because sometimes we think that that obsessor is exactly the one that I hurt in the past. That spirit. Not necessarily. Number one, there is a group of obsessors. As we also see in the gospel, the passage that Jesus brings to us curing other individuals, there was what? A group of spirits obsessing one mind, one heart, right? So it could be somebody who is being sent. I kid you not. And we can read the works and the spirit that works, and we will find that sometimes it's a group of individuals. Or we have to also acknowledge that perhaps the one that we heard in the past have already ascended, is a much better spirit, but because of our psyche, because of our egotistical way of living, that we're still connected. So it's important that we make this analysis of the reasons why we are going through this. And the how. How does it happen? The unhappy mind, set solely on revenge, shoots waves of hatred in its enemy, who lacking moral resources such as watchfulness, charity, and love, registers them through the perispirit on account of mutual vibratory affinity until such waves become a perturbing idea in the victim's psyche. Key word over here, mutual. There is a contract, and it's not unilateral. It's bilateral contract. Both of us signed. If there is this connection, guess what? We're both open for discussion here. Don't think that because we're being obsessed, or if somebody comes and asks for the help, obviously we're not going to tell individuals that you did something wrong, because when a person is hurt, we want to understand, right? Not be judgmental, But for our level of studies here, we know that there is a bilateral contract. And that's what we saw with Julie last week. That shake of hands, it's exactly it. You accept it, let go, right? We feel the joy of retaliating. We want more. All right, you did this, guess what? And it's always that constant dispute. At other times, this is also important, the obsessor spirit emits the same deleterious energies and uses it will condense its vibrations to manifest in terrifying apparitions during the waking state and the partial disengagement of sleep, establishing a connection through sheer horror that develops into a pathology of hallucinations. The dreams, or let's say the nightmare sometimes that we have, the things that sometimes you don't remember or you don't wake up throughout the night suffering from it, but in the morning, throughout the day, you remember that, oh, there was this really strange feeling, unsettled feeling that you come out of it when you get up in the morning. The body's rest, or sometimes not. Most of the time it isn't. But you have this feeling with you since you woke up. Why? Why is it happening? And as we see it developing and getting worse, we need to work. We need to find help, right? One thing that I want to highlight here, because not being a medium, but someone who remembers a lot my dreams, I went through some troubled times in my life, right? Nothing escalated, but I used to get up and get upset. Very upset. You go to bed and you're expecting what? To rest. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep. It happened actually recently, I have to tell you, that I woke up out of a really interesting dream after I came in contact with some individuals that I hadn't seen for some time. And I woke up, and obviously now with my understanding, with the help of many here at the SSB and some others who are not here with us anymore, I understand. I wake up from that dream, or I wake up from that tormented night in the morning, sometimes not settled at all because my body I'm still tired. And I do what? I pray, whatever there was. If I can't deal with it, at least I try to pray. Please help me find some guidance to deal with that problem. Because if it knocked on your door again, guess what? It's time to prepare. It's time to prepare for us to analyze. Because now perhaps is the right time that God has allowed us to reconnect. Or sometimes I have done something that helped me connect, unfortunately, with that individual. Or with that spirit, since I connected with those other spirits who are incarnated as well. It's very hard. It's not easy. Because when it becomes persistent, you feel the urge that you need to stop, right? This needs to stop. But how do we stop? Through the changes of our behaviors. With successive interferences, the obsessor finally dominates the guilty mind, which becomes submissive, giving rein to the gravest phenomena of subjugation, which for centuries ignorance has considered as being demonic possession, and science has labeled as schizophrenia. It's interesting that if we go to our understanding of what schizophrenia is nowadays, the symptoms are, it's amazing. They're it's similar to what we see in when we read, right, the literature. And if there is a lack of understanding of these symptoms today, right, I'm not saying that the person may have issues that need to be taken care of through conventional science, right? But it's very, very similar. And if we can distinguish, if we don't acknowledge that there is this connection, it's very hard to help someone liberated from it. It's extremely hard. So both have to be connected. Both have to be connected. I even looked, and I was going to bring some of the symptoms, but it's something that we can always Google. We always, go after. We have some specialists here that understand a little bit. We can talk to them later on. but we also see in the literature. It's very similar. About a couple weeks ago, I went to the doctor, a yearly checkup that I usually do, that we all hopefully are doing. And it was very interesting that the doctor really stopped. I was impressed, because usually that doesn't happen. And you'll probably be thinking, okay, what's the doctor's number? I want us to go to this doctor. For a couple of times that I started speaking, the doctor was going to do something, check my back, she stopped, and she started listening. And I deal with the public. I know when the public is listening or not. I know when I have to take a step back or not. So I would say something, and she would stop and listen. She then asked me of certain things that I couldn't remember, that the last visit I brought, about this issue, that issue, physical issues. But she, well, how is this? I'm like, oh, wow, I had that issue? Really? Because it went away, right? Obviously, they have a chart. They have a way to follow everything. But just that connection to listen was an amazing thing. So it's if we don't treat the mind, if we don't acknowledge what's happening, not just in the physical, but also the way the person is speaking. Because now when you go to the doctor, they ask what? Do you have any phobias? Do you have any anxiety? Do you have this? Do you have that? And you're like, wow. We should be glad that we have this treatment. We should be glad that we have this. Obviously, I'm pretty sure there are guidelines that we have to follow nowadays, in the medical field, but at least we have an acknowledgement of this. Because in the past, what would happen? You can actually go and institutionalize. It's funny because about a year or 2 years ago, I shared this with Kirsten, or she shared with me, I can't remember, of how patients were treated in the past, right? And when talking about like the physical aspect of it, right, the cleaning and all those things, it was horrible, right? And if you actually do some research on how mental illness was treated in the past, in ancient times. And yes, okay, well, Leo, we're talking about 300 years or 400 years, and we still have a lot to do. Yes, I know, but we have made a great stride. When we go in society and you see individuals who have certain limitations, but they're being treated to a certain degree equally, that is awesome. We can tap ourselves in the back that we're moving to the right directions. Because in the past, people would actually knock on somebody's head to get the devil out, to get the whatever pathology they had. And I know a lot of it was research, unfortunate researches, but we have made thus far. Similarly, the constant psychic ingestions of the sickly mental wave produces various organic disorders, which either enable destructive germs to set in or directly cause cellular degeneration, ulceration, and dysfunction in various organs. Yes. Disobsession, therefore, is a specialized therapy, and it alone has the resources for setting the mentally alienated free. Joanna D'Angela's words. The therapy. We're going to go over what she says, and at the end, I would like to just kind of do a rundown as an example of what we do here at the Spirit Society of Baltimore and in many other centers as we have encountered as well. By enlightening the infirm spirit imbued with a wrongful notion of justice, one must dissuade it from its purpose, showing it its error, and leading it to the certainty that God's love solves everything. This is important because most of the time when we come in contact with an obsessor, they think that they can do justice with their hands. They have lack of understanding or lack of knowledge, perhaps, of the natural laws. And sometimes they have the understanding very well, but they want to do themselves. And they think they can do it quicker. And they obsess the other individual. So if we get ourselves in a position where we like revenge, guess what? Spirits will follow us. And I'm bringing to ourselves again, because if we don't change, nothing's going to change. Upon completion of this task, which requires the participation of an educated medium, if psychophony does not occur through the actual patient, it is essential to self-healing. Aha! Who remembers the techniques? Paula, don't cheat. I know you have the book. It's quite a bit. That's why we go back and we analyze again. Number one, observing one's thoughts and their preferred content in order to radiate positive, healthy energy. Number two, keeping mental attunement with the source of power. Number three, resting, a healthy diet, hygiene, and keeping activities in order. Channeling one's thoughts and emotions towards love, compassion, justice, equanimity, and peace. Okay? Now we'll never forget this, right? Okay, all right. So go back to the chapter, to the prior chapters. Look at these things. And if you find something in these categories that we need to change, let us do it. Little by little. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but little by little. Choose something that you need to tackle one. Go back and watch the video again of last chapter, and we'll learn a little bit more about it. And then she finalized this part, saying this moral reform of the obsessed person will cause the obsessor to appreciate his or her efforts to improve, demonstrating regret for past actions such that the two can become friends and advance together on the path of the good. It's kind of like telling, okay, I'm changing, and if I can do it, you can do it too. But it requires persistence, because the maladies or the errors of the past is not going to change overnight. And it will require a lot of effort, a lot of trying to show someone who has obsessed you for ages, as we saw here, who has obsessed us for reincarnations. Sometimes we change places to say enough is enough. I'm not going to go after Leo anymore. It takes a while. It takes a whole lot. And we have to be careful, because as we have studied here through this book, through other books as well, there is association. In terms of perhaps, my obsessor is not going to obsess me as directly, but obsess others and my family members, friends. Perhaps he or she will associate or connect with another mind, a discarnated mind, that is more effective than he or she can be. We're all connected. I know it's kind of scary, but we really have to acknowledge this. Every form of obsession results from an interpersonal relationship disrupted by the negative forces of aggression, hatred, betrayal, crime, or misguided expressions of love, which throw the sentiments into disarray. This obsession entails interrupting the magnetization between both wretches for the obsessor's spirit, despite considering itself satisfied due to the harm it inflicts on its victim, also suffers from its own misery and lack of peace. We are connected. It's not the obsessor's fault, it's our fault. We owe something. And this is the highlight, one of the highlights as well that we would like to bring for us to take charge. Consider that we're not perfect. Thus, the other person or the other spirit is not perfect. We all have to change. But it starts with us, right? It starts with us. She finalizes by saying, people are always responsible for their own lives. There is sorrow, obsession, and suffering. There is sorrow, obsession, and suffering only when they choose unhealthy instead of healthy behaviors. Obsession indicates a re-emergence of unfortunate acts in search of immediate reparation. It's an opportunity, right? It's a way for us to tell ourselves, I need to change. The environment needs to change. Because if I'm not happy, guess what? Others are not happy. Have we ever thought about this idea that I'm not happy? Most of the time we do what? I'm not happy and I'm not going to make others happy. I'm going to make others miserable. But if we take and flip it, if I'm not happy, others are not happy, and I want to change this, not only for myself but for others, we would be a little bit in a better off position right now. Dissolving the fetters of evil with the powerful energy of love during the obsession therapy thus releases individuals from the suffering caused by their negligence and blesses them with complete health, which is the result of a mind in harmony with life, a physical organization in balance, and emotions and reason aimed at the good, progress, and happiness. How does this translate to our lives? How does this, as we have been trying to bring ourselves and truly connect with this? Because we're all open for this therapy, because the doors are open, it's something that we offer here. But we have to acknowledge that there is a connection, that we're evolutionary beings, and we're not just connected by seeing and speaking the way we are here, but much more than we can think, right? We have the Spirit Center. Somebody comes to the Spirit Center, most of the time, for a problem. And thank God, right? Because this is how we find the opportunity to reconnect. Perhaps someone of the past, right? A situation brings us connected so we can do a greater good. Conduct a meeting or be part of the work, right? Be a friend, somebody that we can call. Person doesn't have to work directly at the Spirit Center. It's nice that the person may come and start doing talks or do study, participate in the study group or whatever function that we may have at the Spirit Center. But just to be reconnected again under an influence, and it's an amazing thing. But we don't see that way usually, right? We say, oh gosh, this person is coming to suffering, or even the person who is suffering see as a burden for themselves. So the person comes here at the Spirit Center. Many of you know, at the Spirit Center of Baltimore, we usually have a time where we connect with that individual. We sit down and we discuss, usually in pairs, a group of or two individuals who sit down with that individual who is suffering, who is under an obsession, right, or some kind of suffering. Most of the time there is a connection. And we talk, what's going on? What's happening? And the person will say, we try to ask the individual, please don't speak too much of your detailed life, because later on you may regret it. Not that any of the members of the obsession therapy will say or say it to others in public, but because the person will feel ashamed. So we ask, don't say it. Say what you think you need to say, and we'll try to help. And it goes on, and we will see, the person will say this person is, or that situation is, and we try to connect and find the issues that, or the causes of that problem. If we can't, we just pray. After that connection, that first connection, we offer the passes, as we all know, right? We offer the water. We also remind the person, you have to change. And I'll say it again, because usually I don't like to say you have, right? Because it's a must. If we want to feel well, it's a must. You need to change your behaviors. And I say this to myself as well, because I'm not immune, right? It's a virus that we can all contract. So we tell the individual, please, do yoga at home. Do something constructive, right? Watch your thoughts, watch your feelings. Ask your family for help. Bring your family in so we can also talk to them if it is necessary to do so. And the person goes through the past session. These talks, not only on the Monday, the study group on Thursday, whatever function we find that is liberating, that disconnects us from these connections, these pre-connections that we have, it's amazing. And we don't have to do them only here at the Spirit Center. We can do them at home. Instead of turning on the TV, we do what? We read a book. Something enlightening. Change your behavior, because the players of the game is not helping you win, right? As a commanding chief, you need to change. So that's what we tell, our friends and one another sometimes when we have also issues, and we move on. Sometimes, most of the time, what happens is that after we encounter with that individual, usually not exactly the same day that we have the mediumistic meeting, what happens? Or weeks later, the medium of the session receives a message, and it's connected with that individual who comes to the Spirit Center. Most of the time, it's the persecutor saying, I want this, I want my life back, I want that back, I want this, I want that, this person did this and this and this and that. When you look at a person before, you think, oh my gosh, I would never think that that person would do such a thing. If we were to know, because we don't disclose this to the patient, right? If we were to know, we would be like, I did this? Ah, you're kidding me. Seriously? No. I would go to jail. Because now we're responding to the environment, right? That's why sometimes we think we're pure. You know, I follow the laws, I pay my taxes, right? So we have to really analyze, how are our thoughts though? How is the feeling? Well, how are we responding to the environment? So we're not victims. We talk to the Spirit who comes obsessing that individual through the medium. Because one of the things that Joanna D'Angelo mentions, that perhaps some of the mediums who we have met, some of them, who started to understand better the Spiritism, came from an obsession. They come through that shock, right? They receive the help, and okay, so mediumship, I'm a medium. And they start studying, they start working at the mediumistic meeting, or sometimes they just do whatever they can do to become more charitable, to present that charity and that love in action, charitable, right, work. So after that, what happens? Most of the time, the individual starts feeling better. The next week is not so intense, or sometimes it becomes more intense because the persecutor starts to bring more of a heavy load of attacks to that individual, and we say, hang in there, stay put, come to the sessions, don't stop. So there is this two side of the story as well, because sometimes we want the happy ending. It doesn't happen that fast. It gets worse. But sometimes it also gets better. After a while, after many, many sessions that we have, we forget about the case, the person is still with us or not, the Spirit comes back, the obsessor, and says, thank you for helping. Thank you for showing me a different way, right? Thank you for allowing me to see it better. Doesn't even mention the obsessed. Gone. Now, what happens to the obsessed or the person who is cured? Sometimes, like I said, it comes back, and leads a good life. At least in that hole, that individual doesn't fall anymore, right? Or stops doing the things that perhaps led them to that re-encounter. But sometimes, what happens? They continue. Things are settled, everything's fine, life is great. I'm just going to go back to the same Leo that I was before. It comes back worse. The obsessor perhaps was helped of the past, but now there are different obsessors saying, look, you see? And they come and talk in the mediumistic meeting. You guys helped. Look what this person is doing again. We don't know, right? Because we don't ask for details, but there is a confirmation. And then we have to go through again, talking to that Spirit. There's an individual in this mediumistic meeting, usually, who talks to the Spirit and guides them. Not that the person has an authority like Jesus had, but there's a group of people, as Jesus taught us, right, who under a umbrella of all guided spirits as well, guides and talks to that individual. Sometimes they question those in the mediumistic meetings too, saying, you don't have any authority to say. Well, perhaps we don't. But God's law has, right? Something that we have to acknowledge. Something that, and I brought you into this, this therapy on how it happens for us to see the different dimensions of it as well. And how we are open for this virus. And my God, we are. And this is something that we really need to think about it in question. The different levels, what's happening to us, why do I think this way, why do I feel this way, why do I want these things, right? And the change must happen fast. We see environmentalists and we see people working in the social economy of the world, right? Wanting abrupt changes, right? And the question is, are we changing ourselves? Are we allowing ourselves to say enough is enough? That's something that I would like to leave with you guys tonight, and to really think about this therapy, how we can prevent it on something that is so mundane to us and is so repetitive to us nowadays, and open up for questions and comments that you may have, and always reminding that the Spiritist Center is the house, the place for us to find this therapy. There are similar therapies, there are similar places, there are things that we can discuss, day in and day out, but with the foundation that we receive with the Spiritist science, we will not find anywhere else. So we would like to open up for any questions that you may have, any comments. It's on.
Very good. I was listening to a talk by this Dr. Roberto Lucio from probably Campo Grande, one of his places. No, Belo Horizonte, I think. Yeah, he's the director of the psychiatric hospital called André Luiz Hospital. So he was talking about cases where the medication did not work, the psychotherapy did not work, so at least they could not dig out any the causes for that horrible state those patients were. So they had this last resource, which is to have a disobsession therapy through a medium. However, for that, you have to have the okay from the patient. The patient has to give the okay. Or the family, and the family, both. If none of those two didn't want, there is no way for you to have a disobsession. But what he says is interesting, the case that he brought, but he brought with very good care, didn't put the real name, changed a little bit the characteristics of the person in order for nobody to identify, oh, that's me or that's my cousin. So what is interesting that he brought is that the victims from the past, they may be quiet, they may be controlled because there was a deal made before we incarnate, for instance. Say, look, he's promising to change. So let's see if he gets to a moral transformation, and we are okay. Okay, you deal, you agree, everybody agrees.
Truth, right?
But then, when you make the same mistake, which is horrible, when you make the same mistake as the victims were complaining, supposedly, he gave an example of abortion, for instance. Those are all victims of abortion from that woman. And then it was okay until the woman in this incarnation made the abortion. That triggered the hatred. They get so outraged, and they start to obsess.
Yes.
Yeah. Or some sexual assault, for instance. It was okay until she was abused in this incarnation, and all this abuse from the past life came, and she was blaming, of course, the mother, because the mother now in the last incarnations allowed the things to perpetuate.
Right.
So that was the hatred, so, and there was making the therapy very difficult.
Perfect. Thank you. Two things that I would like to acknowledge. I think your main point is to highlight this pre-established connection that we had, the truths that we have established in the past, saying, I will change. Or at least say, I will try to change, right? I will make my efforts to change. And it doesn't happen. We fall again. Guess what? It's just going to make it worse, right? It comes worse, full force. And that's when we really have to prepare. We have to accommodate one another, not to judge, because when these issues knock on our doors directly to us, or perhaps a family member or a friend, we have to understand we're all suffering. We're all in the same boat. Otherwise, we would not be incarnated in this place, in this town, connected with these individuals at the Spirit Center, or whatever church, or whatever location we may be. And that leads me to the second point. That's one of the things that Joanna D'Angelo also mentioned, is that sometimes these therapies, they happen in the spiritual realm. What about individuals who are not spiritists? Right? What about individual who doesn't have this knowledge of the past, the present, and the future? We don't. We know, because we say it over and over here. But if we truly ask ourselves, do I have knowledge of what I have done in the past? It's really hard to answer that question, because we try to associate of remembering, right? But when we start to analyze the way we act, and we see that this didn't develop overnight, then we start acknowledging, yes, of what has happened in the past, and what my actions of the now would generate in the future. So we have a slightly idea, but it's a perception. It's not a true understanding of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't, again, be here. And as Joanna D'Angelo mentioned at the beginning of before we started tonight, pay attention before you make a decision, right? Because this is going to impact us in the future, right? So Joanna D'Angelo says that it happens through through higher minds. The mentors of that individual. Perhaps, yes, the patient wants to change and accepts the therapy, but the family doesn't, right? And we may think that the person is not going to receive any help. They will receive help, right? They will receive some kind of help. It may not be as effective or fast.
It's done at distance,
right.
not in front.
It's done at distance. And that would be the next level. Sometimes that we perhaps have, what about somebody who cannot be physically when they're going through a situation that has escalated, that they cannot come to the center. We tell also through this therapy on our Mondays here at the Spirit Side of Baltimore, say, look, at such a time in the evening, you need to stop, turn everything off, right? Cell phone, TV, get your family together and let us pray. Because we will send our vibration, we will do what we can to send a vibration. And hopefully your mentor, acknowledging of the mentor of the house, the mentor of the Spirit Center, will go and help. But this is a very good point, Yasko, because sometimes we put the environment out there, right? In terms of, it's that individual's decision, but we're all connected. Why is there a need for the family to accept? And if they don't accept, we don't do it. Well, guess what? Free will. That would not be a respect of the free will of those members. We can impose the treatment. We don't go to anybody's house and say, you have to be a spiritist, you have to go, or you undergo the spiritist treatment. We can't do that. Right. So, very good point. Thank you. Anyone else? Paula.
Since you referenced back to what I consider a really important section in the previous chapter on self-healing, those 4 points that you included in this, how would you guide the person coming to you for counseling? They either have a physical illness that's been diagnosed, or they're recognizing they're in a state of anxiety or depression. I mean, outside of the normal things you do, like you work with your medical doctor or you find a mental health therapist, how do you guide this person internally to look at their thoughts, feelings, and acceptance?
Thank you. It depends on each case. The little that I can go back to and the sessions that I have been part of, and the way we have spoken with the individuals who have come to the Spiritist Center, is to, number one, as you already mentioned, seek medical help, because that's important. That's number one. Number two, change. Literally change. And this will be identified by talking to an individual and see what you like to do. What you think will be best for you to do. And the person will give A or B or C answer, and we'll say, well, perhaps this is helpful, but it's not actually what will generate a change. Because if they don't somehow change, it's not going to get anywhere. Now, we can go into depth and say, you can pray, but sometimes the person doesn't even want to say God. Literally, there are individuals who just despise the idea of praying, especially when they're suffering. I'll share something with you. I have been in the state of really alarming situations that I didn't have the words to pray. I did not. I could not. And that is not fun because you're so, it's such a tough situation that you don't have the energy to pray. So sometimes demanding a person or saying, pray, you'll be fine. It doesn't work that way. So you have to find practical ways. Change the environment. Change your health habits. Go for a walk. Connect with something that you like, that brings you joy, right? If there is something that is really imposing suffering on that individual, try to disconnect. Sometimes it could be a family member, and it's hard to say, push that person aside. No. There are practical ways that we can talk and we can find for that person to help them lead a better life. But the point is that it has to go case by case. It's not something that we can say. Now, one of the things that we can say for sure is that we'll offer to come to not only the treatment, the therapy at the Spiritist Center, but also the other sessions that we have. Why? To break the cycle. And the more we do to break that cycle, to break the connection, things will be better. Finally, one thing that I would like to say, that, and this is the hardest part of it, right? To be charitable. To do charity. Because if the obsessor is watching us and they see that Leo's trying to be a good boy, we'll leave him aside. And what is to be charitable? To go and give money or food to the poor? No. To think positively. To go to work and go to work willingly. To be with your family and be with your family willingly. Not to complain. Not to say words that perhaps will not help us. So there is an array of things that we need to bring that we will discover from the situation while we are talking to the brother or sister who comes for help at the Spiritist Center, that we can say. We're not going to give medical advice because we cannot do that. And we tell the patients the same thing. We're not here to recommend this or this, that way. All that we can offer is perhaps a hand that you can now, come and receive the rescue. And we tell them as well as to go to their homes and try to do the same thing. How? Have the magnetized water through your God at Home. How is the God at Home? We have actually pamphlets in the back that explains how to do the God at Home if you don't know. It doesn't have to be a Spiritist book that you read, but go read something that will uplift your mind. It's hard. It's not easy. Because even for us, as Spiritists, for the longest time ever, I'll share this with you, don't tell anybody, okay? There were times in my life that I had to stop doing whatever I was doing. It's Tuesday, 8 o'clock. We have to do the God at Home. And guess what? This, oh gosh, the God at Home. Here it comes again. It happens. Thank God it doesn't happen anymore. I actually get excited. I have alarms and everything because sometimes I'm studying and all, but we will go through that time because it's what? You breaking the old habits. Imagine when you have to get up early or do this or do that, change that habits of many, many years. It's really hard. So we have to change. We have to acknowledge this need of change. And the only way that we can acknowledge a need of change is acknowledge the suffering, what's causing it, and how we got there. Next month, We will study the alternative therapies, and we have what, 4 more? Yeah, 4 more to go. Well, it's already September. Kirsten, you want to ask a question? Okay. Oh yeah, comment. Okay.
I think my questions would just wouldn't like them. I wanted to just touch on the disobsession or obsession in general. I think it was Haroldo Dutra Diaz, it could have been another speaker, it could have been Givaldo, who said that the problem with obsession isn't intervening or getting the person help or leading the person or having interventions and things like that. I mean, there are a plethora of things that can be done for a person that's going through an obsession, but the greatest obstacle is the person that's actually going through the obsession